Hi, we are with J.D. Rule, author of Neap Tide, a DownEast Story. We're here at Northern Tides in Lubec, Maine. Thanks, John, for showing us your book. You want to show us again? We'd like to get a nice picture of that. There you go. There's the cover. Well, John. I mean, can you tell me a little bit about you as a Lubecker? Can you?
Me as a Lubecker.
And why a DownEast Story too? I mean, let's get the full DownEast picture.
Two separate questions. Let's start with the first one.
Sure.
As far as me being a Lubecker, my wife and I have had association with the community for over 20 years as property owners.
Great.
We've lived here full-time for about 3 years. And during the previous years, visited quite often. So we've been around. I myself have lived in New England a good bit of my life, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. I traveled commercially in Connecticut for many years. So I'm no stranger to New England. As far as why this is called a DownEast Story, well, partially because it's set in DownEast. It's people that are from this community will probably feel pretty comfortable with some of the locations. They'll know where they are. And this is one of several books that will be part of the DownEast Story series. It happens to be the first one, but it's far from the last.
Awesome. And tell me about Neap Tide. I mean, I know this is a great book, and it's got a great setting, obviously, in DownEast Maine, in our neck of the woods. But can you tell me a little bit about, your characters or the plot?
Well, I'm not going to give the plot away.
Well, no.
I don't want to do that. I want people to enjoy the plot without me telling them what it is. But what it's about is essentially a woman from Boston who is disappointed with the way her life arc is playing out in Beantown, and she falls in love with a man with Acadian roots who happens to live in this neck of the woods, and comes to live here without fully understanding how much of a culture shock it's going to be. In
culture shock, what do you mean? The shift from city to rural Maine, or do you mean culturally? How do you mean?
Shifting from a large city to a very small village. I'll give you just one little example. There is a scene where, while they are in Boston, her to-be fiance comes to visit, and they go off to a nightclub in Cambridge, which happens to be less than 15 minutes away.
Yeah. And
she realizes later that if she goes to live in DownEast Maine, he's quick to point out, the nearest such nightclub is well over 2 hours away, and it's not such a casual thing to just drop in and take in some live music, at least in that type of environment. So these are things that she has to get used to. There's other things too, and some of them are fairly dramatic.
Well, you say that this is surrounding Cecilia, who's moving to DownEast Maine, the main character, and she's got a fiance. So is this a romantic book? Is it steamy? Is it a tragedy? Can you go in that direction for us?
I think you could probably find elements of all of those in the story.
Great.
There is a tragedy in the story, and the tragedy is one that brings her back to a point of reconciliation. Is it steamy? Well, that's in the eye of the beholder, and I don't happen to think it is. But I do enjoy using sex as an indicator of how relationships are faring between the partners. If you have a sex scene in the beginning that shows them as loving partners, and later on things are different, it simply means that something has changed. So it's not about sex, but it does use sex as a means of enlarging the story, to make it more accessible, to show exactly how people are being affected by their environment.
Well, it's everyday living. That's pretty much what you're doing, is describing an adult relationship, is what it sounds like.
I think that's exactly the right
Excellent. Excellent. So what about our close-knit society? DownEast Maine is really special in the fact that everybody knows everybody else. And coming from Cambridge or a bigger metropolis, we barely know our neighbors. Is there a conflict with characters, or is there a conflict in the story when we're talking about that different type of a move from city to rural?
Absolutely there is. And in a town like Boston, you're surrounded by people, but you can still feel very much alone. The same thing happens in any large city. If you come to a town such as the fictitious town that is used within the story, where the population is quite small, everybody knows everybody, and everybody knows everybody's business. And you cannot hide. And at least you cannot hide successfully, because then you become the target. And that's something that she has to come to grips with. It's something that she didn't understand going in.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, it does nail down a lot of folks who do move to DownEast Maine and then find themselves in that sort of a situation. But you know, to me, it's a very true hands-on story of what happens when somebody does move here, and totally out of their element. I think that the nightclub scene is exactly on. I mean, you can find music in small little pubs, or you can find music in our nonprofit organizations. But you're right. A nightclub scene, that's not happening here. Things roll up at 7, 8 o'clock at night, and if you want to boogie till 2 in the morning, that's just not happening.
I grew up in Lexington, Massachusetts, and I'm familiar with some of the clubs that were existing, at least at that time, in the Cambridge area, right around Harvard Square. And it's a club very much like one of those that this scene takes place in. And you just don't find clubs like that around here. Not that there isn't good music, not that there aren't musicians that are talented, but the atmosphere is still not the same.
Yeah. Now I want to dive into another topic. This is Neap Tide, it's the DownEast Story, like you said.
Right.
I know that you kind of alluded to, at the beginning of the interview, that you may have more books coming, more stories coming.
I do.
Excellent. And so for those people who either visit us in the summer or have always wanted to visit Maine and just haven't made it here yet, what's the attraction not only to this, but to the future stories that you're going to bring to the reader?
I try and make the setting as realistic as possible. And there are scenes in this book that take place in Lubec, and it's identified as being Lubec. And if you walk down the street after having read some of these scenes, you'll feel like you were part of that scene. At least that's what I hope. So if you happen to come from some other part of the country and you read one of these stories before you come, then the shock of what you walk into may not be the same. You may enjoy the fishing boats and understand a little bit more about what they're doing. You may understand why traffic in Water Street in Lubec is sometimes blocked up entirely by large fishing vessels being launched right down the middle of the street.
Well, especially during lobster season.
And Jerry, I'm sure you're quite familiar with seeing that sight. You look out your front window on occasion and all you see is the side of a boat.
It does happen quite often, especially during spring and fall.
So that's the kind of environment that I want to bring the reader into.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much for dropping in at Northern Tides and sharing a little bit about your book. And I do look forward to the next 2, 3, 4 more books that will be printed.
Well, there'll be a few more. I'm not going to commit to a number.
Okay.
But I do expect to have the next one on your shelf before the Christmas season.
That'd be wonderful. We look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry.